Welcome. David was the king of Israel. In ancient times, a king had many duties. He was the chief judge of his nation. He also had the responsibility to lead Israel's army out in war. David was a busy man. How did he arrange his days? How did he begin his days? Well, as we discover in today's Psalm, Psalm 5, he began with prayer. My name is Keith Simons. I'm a Bible teacher from England, and I present these talks, how you can understand the King James Bible using the book of Psalms. Each time we look at a different psalm, verse by verse and word by word, seeking to understand its meaning. Psalm 5 today then, it has an ancient heading, To the Chief Musician upon Nehilot, a psalm of David. The chief musician. This is worship for God's house, the tabernacle or the temple in later days, and the chief musician was the leader of the music there who would arrange the singers and the musicians. That word which is left untranslated by our King James translators, Nehilot, that might signify the sort of music that was to go with this psalm. A meaning that has been suggested for that word is the flutes. People would play on flutes while the choir would sing this psalm. But it could mean other things too, and two of the most prominent meanings that have been suggested are a swarm of bees or an inheritance. The psalm says a lot about the righteous, God's people, who are God's inheritance, God's particular possession. But in truth, no one knows the meaning of that word. Let's go into the psalm itself then, at verse 1. Give ear to my words, O Lord, consider my meditation. Verse 2. Hearken unto the voice of my cry. At first glance, we seem to have three lines which are all saying the same thing. Give ear to my words, consider my meditation, hearken unto the voice of my cry. However, David used his language very deliberately, and often when we see what seems to be repetition like that, David is drawing out different points, and we have to examine his words more clearly to understand the point. So when David says, consider my meditation, what is meditation? Well, in English, we're usually meaning a person's thoughts. The Hebrew word, though, signifies whispering, a quiet, indistinct sound, murmuring, that sort of sound. So, if that's a quiet sound, what does David mean in verse 2 when he says, the voice of my cry? Well, then he's signifying a loud sound. He's signifying him shouting and calling out to God. God, hear my prayer. Hear my prayer when it's quiet so that only you can hear it, or when it's loud, when I shout it at the top of my voice. Whether my prayer is quiet or loud, God, I need you to hear it. And I know that if you hear prayer, then you will answer that prayer and that you will act in response to my request. Into verse 2 then. Hearken unto the voice of my cry, my King and my God. I've written a few songs, Christian songs, nothing that you've ever heard of, nothing that's achieved commercial success, but I know how to write songs. And I know that in English at least, the word king is a very easy word to put into a song because it rhymes with sing. It's an easy word. It costs me nothing to put it into my song, so it's easy to call God a king. It wasn't easy for David. David was the king of Israel, the most powerful man in his country. The kings of other nations claimed absolute authority over their people, over their wealth, over everything in those nations. It cost David a lot to call God his king. To say, I'm the king of Israel, but God, I'm really just your servant. You are the true king. You are the one whose power is above my power, whose authority is above my authority. And to take that word and for David to say it or to record it in a way that it would be used in the worship at the temple, he's drawing to everyone's attention the fact that God is his king. The end of verse 2, for unto thee will I pray. That might seem to add nothing. Of course, this is a prayer that David is praying to God, but once again, it's important. As we'll see with the meaning of that prayer, that is what distinguishes God's people from wicked people. God's people turn to God in prayer. Wicked people might say prayers, but they don't accept God's authority over them. They live in their own ways. They reject God. David says, unto thee, God, will I pray. And what's more, he doesn't just pray to God, he gives God the first place in his life. That, for David, is shown by the fact that he gives God the first time in the day. Verse 3, my voice shalt thou hear in the morning, O Lord. In the morning will I direct my prayer unto thee, and will look up. In the morning will I direct my prayer. Will I direct? Those words in Hebrew mean to set in order. Just as a priest would set out for the early morning sacrifice, the wood on the altar, and set the parts of the animal on the altar in order to burn them, and the smoke rising up to heaven was a sign of God's acceptance of the gift of that animal. So David says, my prayer is being set in order first thing in the morning to be placed before God as a kind of sacrifice. And David says that he will, the end of the verse, will look up. Look up? Looking out for God's answer. He's not just praying empty prayers in the belief that it's generally a good thing to do. No, he's actively looking for God to answer his prayer, and he records that. Verse 4, for thou art not a God that hath pleasure in wickedness, neither shall evil dwell with thee. Why is David so pious, so devoted to God? Because he knows that God is completely good. He knows that God doesn't approve of wicked acts. If David were to become a wicked man, to turn from his service to God, then God would not be pleased with him. So David devotes himself to God, the God that is perfectly good. The end of that verse, neither shall evil dwell with thee. A wicked person has no place where God is. God belongs in the place that is holy and pure and perfect. Therefore, God's judgment must be against evil people. And David thinks of himself as a king, and the people whom he chooses to allow into his palace and to have access to him, he will allow in those who do what is good. They will be his servants. And when evil people attempt to come before him and maybe to get a judgment from him against someone whom they hate, well, David will throw them out and punish them. God is a king like that, a king who does not like wickedness, who does not allow evil people into his palace. Verse 5, the foolish shall not stand in thy sight. Thou hatest all workers of iniquity. Yes, God is a God who judges between his people, between the people who live for him, the people who renounce their sin, the people who choose to live in his way and seek to please him, and those who are called the foolish and the workers of iniquity here. The foolish, the Hebrew word really means the boastful, those who are proud in themselves and about themselves. They don't have a place in God's palace when God is the king. No, God acts against them and he punishes them, and unless they turn from their foolish, boastful ways, they will fall under God's judgment. Thou hatest all workers of iniquity. Iniquity in English means sin, evil deeds. The Hebrew word here means trouble, sorrow, vanity. Those people who are working to undo all that is good, God hates them. God will act against them. God is their judge. And how fierce are his judgments. Verse 6, thou shalt destroy them that speak leasing. Leasing, an old-fashioned word for lies. It's people who speak false words, who deceive other people that God is acting against in this verse. The Lord will abhor the bloody and deceitful man. The Lord abhors them. The Lord hates them. What it means is it's like a judge who is angry with a criminal who has tried to come into his court and pretended to be innocent. Can you imagine how angry that judge is with them? The Lord will abhor the bloody and deceitful man. Bloody means someone with blood on their hands, a murderer, someone who kills people for their own advantage. Or maybe they don't kill the person, but maybe they destroy that person's reputation. They act with great cruelty. They would kill if they could. And the deceitful man, the person who depends on lies and deceit to take advantage of other people. It's these people who God's judgment is against. And for David, that's a severe warning. He's this powerful king. He is tempted to use his power in a wrong way. Sometimes he does use his power in a wrong way, taking advantage of people. But no, he knows that he must turn from that sin. He must turn to God. He cannot live in that sinful way, even if it brings him advantages, wealth, importance. He must reject those things, as he testifies in verse 7. But as for me, I will come into thy house in the multitude of thy mercy, and in thy fear will I worship toward thy holy temple. God's house, God's temple, the place where God is. David is coming before there, and as he comes before that place in prayer, he knows he can't be relying on his own righteousness, because he knows that he in himself is a sinner and guilty of wrong acts. He must depend on God's forgiveness. He must seek God's cleansing. He comes to God's house in the multitude of God's mercy. The word mercy here is the word that elsewhere is translated loving kindness in the Bible. It's in the fact that God forgives sins that David has a right to come to God's house, to be present in the place where God is, to worship and to pray before God. In thy fear will I worship toward thy holy temple. He turns towards the temple in prayer, and he does so in fear, in deep reverence and respect for God. Not thinking about his own importance, not thinking about the way people consider him a great man. No, thinking only of God and of the great importance of God and the respect that is due to God. And David is anxious to turn away from the wrong ways which he's fallen into at times. And so he prays in verse 8, Lead me, O Lord, in thy righteousness, because of mine enemies. Make thy way straight before my face. God, I know about your righteous standards. I know that you are perfectly good, and for me to wander off in the wrong way, on the wrong paths, the winding paths of sin and selfishness that would only take me away from you. God, I need to go in the righteous path, the right way, the straight and narrow way. And the only way I'm going to find that straight and narrow way of serving you faithfully is if you, God, lead me. If you show me the way. My enemies would turn me off that way and turn me on to wrong ways. But God, before my face, may your way be straight, so that I simply walk ahead, doing the things that you have called me to do, living for you, choosing the way of faithfulness, of good, of life, and of truth. Because my enemies don't behave like that. My enemies behave so differently from that, from the way I desire to live, or rather the way in which you direct me, God, to live. My enemies then, verse 9, there is no faithfulness in their mouth. Their inward part is very wickedness. Their throat is an open sepulchre. They flatter with their tongue. 4 statements there. We've often observed in these talks how much a Hebrew poet liked to make 4 statements. Just as there's 4 directions, north, south, east, west. Just as there's 4 sides to a person, front, back, left, right. So it describes completely something, and here he's describing completely the attitude of wicked people. Their mouth, their speech, there is no faithfulness in their mouth. They don't hold to truth and loyalty. They say whatever will bring them an advantage. Their inward part is very wickedness. Yes, you look inside them, and the deeper you go, the more wickedness you find. On the surface, they might look to be good people. On the surface, they probably impress people very much. But the deeper you go, the worse they are, because there is complete wickedness inside these evil people. Their throat is an open sepulchre. A sepulchre is a grave, and you can see that person opening their mouth to swallow down a person to death. Of course, it's a word picture. It's drawn from the actions of fierce wild animals, which sometimes swallow their prey whole. That is how wicked people behave, just bringing death instead of life, choosing the way of death because they think they can get an advantage from their cruelty, from their cruel words and their cruel plans that they utter with their mouth. The last part of the verse, they flatter with their tongue. Flatter. To flatter means to speak words to impress a person, say how great that person is, but they're not genuine words. The Hebrew language, here it uses a word that describes smooth and pleasant and deceitful words. Yes, their words seem very nice. They seem very pleasant, but they're deceitful. Their words are intended to deceive you with lies, so that you fall into their traps and you are destroyed by their actions. But there is a God in heaven who is the judge of all people, and the judge even of these wicked people. And to him David turns for judgment in this situation. Verse 10, Destroy thou them, O God, let them fall by their own counsels. Counsel really means advice, but the Bible uses it as a word for the product of that advice, for the plans that evil people make. Let them make their evil plans and let them fall into their evil plans, just as Haman did in the book of Esther. He made a plan against God's servant Mordecai to kill him, yet Haman died on the same gallows that he built for Mordecai. Or rather, Haman hung on it, having been killed. Let wicked people be judged by the very cruelty, David says, that they themselves have planned against others. Let their wicked plans backfire and act against them. Now, God would much prefer that wicked people would turn from their evil attitudes, that they would seek his forgiveness, that they would turn back, as indeed David did. He sinned against God and he turned back to God. But David is praying, if they will not turn back, if they continue determined in these evil acts, then God, act against them. And let your judgment be against them. Cast them out in the multitude of their transgressions. They have no place in God's temple. They have no place in God's palace. They have no place among the people of God. So David says, cast them out. With their many, many rebellious schemes which they've carried out, for they have rebelled against thee. They've disobeyed you, God. They've turned against you. So act against them. Cast them out. Take them away. They have no place among God's people. Well, David doesn't end with these wicked people, but he ends by turning his attention to God's people, to the joy and the happiness that they have in serving God. Verse 11, But let all those that put their trust in thee rejoice. Let them ever shout for joy, because thou defendest them. Let them also that love thy name be joyful in thee. And how he fills his psalm now with joy, the joy of the thought of how God defends his people, the joy of the thought that those who trust in God will not in the end be disappointed, though they may suffer many troubles now, though they may have many enemies and those enemies may be cruel, yet they can know joy forevermore in the presence of God. Verse 12, For thou, Lord, wilt bless the righteous. The righteous, those who are good, not because they themselves are good, but because they've received the righteousness of God. They've been forgiven by God, and God is leading them in the right and good way, just as was so for David. Remember what he prayed in verse 8. Lead me, O Lord, in thy righteousness. And now he says, for thou, Lord, wilt bless the righteous. With favour wilt thou compass him, as with a shield. Compass, surround him. You're going to surround him with your pleasure, with your delight, and it's going to be for him like a shield, like the board which soldiers would carry into war. A big board, a board as big as their bodies, so that none of the enemy's attacks, none of the enemy's arrows can hurt them. But it's not a shield that's defending God's people in verse 12. It's God's favour, God's pleasure, that is what defends them from all of their enemies, that keeps them safe through all their trials in this life and brings them safely to be with God forever in heaven and in the New Jerusalem. Please write to me. My email address is 333kjv@gmail.com. My name again is Keith Simons. Please let me know which country you're in and which state if you're in the United States. 333kjv@gmail.com. And now in conclusion, here's the whole of Psalm 5. To the chief musician upon Nehilot, a psalm of David. Give ear to my words, O Lord. Consider my meditation. Hearken unto the voice of my cry, my King and my God. For unto thee will I pray. My voice shalt thou hear in the morning, O Lord. In the morning will I direct my prayer unto thee, and will look up. For thou art not a God that hath pleasure in wickedness, neither shall evil dwell with thee. The foolish shall not stand in thy sight. Thou hatest all workers of iniquity. Thou shalt destroy them that speak leasing. The Lord will abhor the bloody and deceitful man. But as for me, I will come into thy house in the multitude of thy mercy, and in thy fear will I worship toward thy holy temple. Lead me, O Lord, in thy righteousness because of mine enemies. Make thy way straight before my face. For there is no faithfulness in their mouth. Their inward part is very wickedness. Their throat is an open sepulchre. They flatter with their tongue. Destroy thou them, O God. Let them fall by their own counsels. Cast them out in the multitude of their transgressions, for they have rebelled against thee. But let all those that put their trust in thee rejoice. Let them ever shout for joy because thou defendest them. Let them also that love thy name be joyful in thee. For thou, Lord, wilt bless the righteous. With favour wilt thou compass him as with a shield.